What's going on, everybody? It's your boy, R.W. Coolins, coming to you from the Speak On It show. And we're doing a little bit something different today because I found this article that I read, and it talks about, the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, the Tulsa, Oklahoma Massacre, which was 99 years ago in May, about 2 weeks ago, was the anniversary. But I'm going to touch on you. Well, let me stop right there. First and foremost, giving me honor to God who allows me to come at you in this manner and be able to give you this information and pass on things like this to you. Now, like I was saying, I'm coming at you today. It's kind of a history lesson, but I think it's a lot of things that is something that people really need to hear about and really understand. And at the end of this, I'm going to give you a synopsis of my understanding and why, certain actions of people in today's society takes us back to what we understand that happened to our people at certain times throughout our history. And, we always hear about the Tulsa Massacre because it was, considered Black Wall Street. It was an affluent area in Tulsa where, and I'm not sure a lot of people understand, but what sparked it all was there was already this jealousy about where the blacks at that time, being Black Wall Street as it was called, were affluent. They were finding their way. They were doing their thing. They were becoming self-sufficient in the community that they had. But one day, a 17-year-old white girl accused a black teenager of assault in downtown Tulsa, and white terrorism ensued. During that time, originally they had reported, and I'm reading notes here also, y'all bear with me. They reported that there was only 36 people killed, but the death toll has been 300 or more is what they've come to find out as they've done more research on the Tulsa Massacre, a.k.a. Black Wall Street area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So that's the one that everybody knows about. That's the one everyone talks about. However, I found this article, and it was on BET, and I want to give you the name of the person who wrote, written by Clay Kane. And I'll post it also in on my page so you can go and read it for yourself. But I'm just going to touch on a couple of things. But five other massacres, brutal massacres that happened, race massacres that happened to our people. And when we, as a people, were trying to get ourselves together after slavery, after Reconstruction, after all these things that have happened to us, to get ourselves to a level where we, were becoming, making our way, as you want to say. So I'm going to get into those five, but here we go. The first one, Colfax, Louisiana Massacre, 1873. And despite some people claiming America was great, we hear that all the time now, for black people 7 years after the Civil War, black men and women were being massacred in plain sight during Reconstruction. One of the most horrific incidents that we know of was April of 1873 in Colfax, Louisiana. Approximately 150 black men were murdered by white men with guns and cannons for trying to freely assemble at a courthouse. Sadly, the exact number of deaths is unknown because many black bodies were, thrown into a place they call the Red River, so those were not really accounted for, but they say 150 plus is what we'll say were killed because they wanted to assemble at the courthouse. Wilmington, North Carolina Massacre, 1898. Wilmington, North Carolina was a thriving area with a majority black population. There were also several black elected public officials forcing whites to share power. Of course, the threat of Negro rule created illogical white racial resentment. The media frequently reported erroneously that white womanhood, now listen to this now, white womanhood was threatened by black men. A white Wilmington newspaper printed a speech by a Georgia feminist that read, and I quote, "If it requires lynching to protect women's dearest possession from ravening, drunken human beasts, then I say lynch 1,000 Negroes a week if it is necessary." Now, this was a white female feminist from Georgia. By the election of 1898, black men were prevented from voting to push out the already black elected officials. However, white supremacists could not stop the economic power the blacks had already created. Therefore, they destroyed black Wilmington with terrorism. The day after the 1898 election, whites announced the White Declaration of Independence. They overthrew the Wilmington government, destroyed the printing press, forced out the mayor, and a mob of white men attacked black residents. There were reportedly 60 to 300 black people killed by this act of domestic terrorism. For over 100 years, the powers that be in Wilmington tried to erase the massacre, which is, from the history books, until the year of 2000, when the General Assembly established the 1898 Wilmington Race Riot Commission, and they did a research to try to find out exactly what happened and everything, and that's why we're able to talk about it now, is because they did a commission, they did the research, they did the historical aspect of it, and now we know about it. Atlanta Massacre, 1906. Like many of the massacres, the violence in Atlanta at the turn of the century began, as we always hear, with white women accusing black men of rape. On September 22nd, 1906, Atlanta newspapers reported that 4 white women allegedly they were assaulted by black men. That they were assaulted by black men, a claim that was completely unfounded. In reality, whites were threatened by upwardly mobile black communities in Atlanta, which they believed were taking away their jobs. The terrorists went into black communities. Well, this bogus report of sexual assault drove as many as 2,000 white men to the streets. The terrorists went into black communities to beat, stab, and shoot any black people in sight. And this was a PBS report. A disabled man was chased down and beaten to death. This is where they had no regard for anyone, as I mentioned the other day, with a different melanin content. Communities were destroyed, and the unofficial death toll was up to 100. Next one, Elaine, Arkansas Massacre, 1919. The Encyclopedia of Arkansas calls the Elaine Massacre by far the deadliest racial confrontation in Arkansas history and possibly the bloodiest racial conflict in the history of the United States. Blacks outnumbered whites 10-1 and were demanding economic justice, as many of them were forced into sharecropping. A union was created to protect sharecroppers, and whites were outraged and even the smallest move toward equality. In September of 1919, there was a union meeting among black workers, and whites showed up to riot. As a result, 1 white man was shot and killed. Whites convinced themselves there was a threat of a black insurrection, and as usual, reacted with violence. Hundreds of white men attacked black residents, but many fought back, including black veterans. Sadly, there were reports of over 200 black people, including children, killed. Many who weren't killed were arrested and tortured while in custody. They were forced to confess about an insurrection, with 12 men receiving the death penalty. They eventually became known as the Elaine 12. Let's keep in our mind, most recently we had the Jenna 6. These were the Elaine 12, being told to confess their guilt about an insurrection, and they were sent to receive the death penalty. With the help of the NAACP, their case went to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1923, and they were exonerated. This was one of the first times the NAACP won a case in front of the Supreme Court. Now, this one I think everybody knows about, the Rosewood, Florida Massacre in 1923. Similar to the massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921, 2 years later, y'all, it's 2 years later, a black community was burned to the ground 2 years later after a white woman named Fannie Taylor claimed she was assaulted by a black man on January 1st, 1923. The first person killed was Sam Carter, a local blacksmith. He was tortured and his mutilated body, like normal process, hung from a tree. Sam Carter was one of many. There are reports that up to 150 people were killed in Rosewood, Florida. After Rosewood was destroyed, a grand jury and special prosecutors decided there was not enough evidence for prosecution of the white men who killed innocent American citizens. And everybody remembers this one because back in 1997, John Singleton, rest in peace, John Singleton, famously made the film Rosewood starring Ving Rhames based on that massacre. Anyone who has not seen Rosewood, I would tell you to find it, sit down, watch it, and it'll give you an understanding of what happened in all these other massacres that I've just talked about, where people, women, white women have accused black men of crimes, rape and otherwise, and this is what happened. We can go all the way back to Emmett Till, who was accused of whistling and looking at a white woman wrongly, in her opinion, which she reported, and we all remember what happened to Emmett Till. Now, I'm reading this today on the day that someone chose to do a rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a couple weeks after the anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. Now, I don't know, like I always say, I can't judge a person's heart because I don't know a person's heart, but whatever he chooses to do, that's what he chooses to do. But I'm not even going to correlate that to what I'm talking about now. What I'm going to correlate it to is this. If you listen to what I've talked about in identifying all these from the Tulsa Massacre all the way down to, the Rosewood Massacre, we're talking about 6. We hear about 1, but there were 6 total. And that's not counting the ones we never hear about. But in each one of these, what you heard was either the threat of the black man at the time becoming more powerful than they thought he should be, or someone accusing the black man of doing something that was totally unjust in order for, and I'll put it in, the black man to stay in his place. These incidents at the time, like the article said, you don't read about them in history books. They're coming around now to start being identified for what they are, these massacres, and they're trying to find out the total amount of people. But let's just take everything that I've read in these articles, in this article, and bring it up to now. If we bring it up to now, I want people to understand that when you look at TV, you look at the news, or you hear these reports, and they call these women Karens or Susans or whoever they want to call, that decided they want to call the police because a black person, a person of color, is doing something or somewhere or something that they don't feel that person should be doing, and they decide to call the police. The reason it becomes such a big issue with us, the people of color, is because of these articles, or this article that I read about all these incidents that happened before, and what we know to be true today in the Trayvon Martin, the George Floyds, the Breonna Taylors, and all the ones you can think about that have been killed at the hands of police because someone called the police without true justification on what they're calling them for. Not that they've committed a crime, not that they've done anything wrong, but because in your eyes and in your opinion, they're somewhere or they're doing something that you don't feel they should be doing because you don't agree with who they are and where they are at that particular time. This is deep-rooted, and it harkens to the state of when we talk about racism that no one wants to truly have a discussion about, that people get offended when you say racist or racism. It's like a trigger word to people of non-color, because the bottom line is, if you portray, practice, or show signs of things that we know to be true that are associated with racism, then you will probably be given the title of being racist. This is not something that we have just arbitrarily made up in our minds that people are racist towards us. The history has shown us, history has given us experiences that show us that these things happen. And until you've had these things happen to you, to brush them off as we are just being dramatic, it says in these articles, it says in everything that I've just read, that there's always been a fear of people of color having too much power. Or there's always been a fear of people of color being somewhere that you don't feel that they should be. Who made you the judge and the jury of where we should be in this United States of America, or what we should do in this United States of America, or how we should act in this United States of America? When I read these articles, when I read my history, when I look at what's going on in the world today, as I did in the video before, I'm not okay. I'm not okay because we see this happen over and over and over again. And the thing is, it's one thing to say that you're not racist, but it's another thing to stand up and say that you're anti-racist, that you're being involved in the point of changing the practices of the racists. Now, I get passionate when I talk about this because as a man of color, you see these things happen. You're blessed that the extent of being killed at the hands of a policeman or someone hanging you from a tree or any of those things you can think about that has happened throughout our history has not happened to you or me at this time. But I think the understanding needs to come into play that the reason we become so emotional and upset and you know, I can't even come up with words, but the reason we become this way is because when people say we get too emotional and it didn't happen to you, the bottom line is we don't know when it may happen to us or somebody we know or one of our children. But until you've walked a day, and I will say a day, because it only takes one day, 1 hour to face racism because of who you are and your melanin content. It only takes one day, 1 hour, for you to truly realize that as much as people try to tell you we are all created equal, when you walk the face of this earth as a person of color, in your mind every day, you know that your visual is not seen as being equal in many people's eyes. We got to get better. We got to do better. And one thing we have to do is accept the fact of what people have done to people of color in the past and are still doing today. Accept it, learn from it, and let's talk about how to move forward. Because when we talk about it, we get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again, is where people's retort back to us is, why do you always go back there? Well, we go back there because what happened back there is still happening up here today. I pray that in my lifetime, I'll see it. And notice I said I pray. I can't even say I'm hopeful, but I do pray. Because I want my kids and my future grandkids to know that they are seen as equal and not less than. Go read up on these massacres. I'll post the article. You can go read it for yourself. Do your research. Watch Rosewood if you get a chance. That'll give you some insight Black Wall Street, all these things. Know, learn, read, start getting into your history. Not what they told you, but what you went and found out. You're with to speak on the show with your boy R.W. Coolins. I just wanted to give you a little history lesson today, and I know I got passionate there for a minute, but one thing that you got to understand, as a black man, when I decide to do these and I go in to read, I think about all those people who suffered in order for me to be able to come on this with this microphone and speak my truth. Because without them, there is no me. Love yourself, love one another, keep your head up, and most definitely, keep your faith in God. I'll see you on the video, and I'll see you on the radio. Holla at your boy. Peace.